You have spent a lifetime constructing an impeccable reputation, building vast enterprises, and securing your position at the absolute apex of your industry. Yet no matter how impenetrable your external empire may appear, every human being possesses historical missteps, calculated risks that failed, or personal vulnerabilities. In the ruthless theater of executive power, there will always be opportunistic predators who attempt to weaponize these perceived flaws against you. They will subtly mention a past failure, highlight a momentary lapse in judgment, or poke at an insecurity during a high-stakes negotiation to destabilize your psychological equilibrium. Their entire strategy relies on a singular, predictable biological response: your instinct to defend yourself. The moment you flinch, justify, or attempt to hide the flaw, you immediately validate their attack and hand them the precise psychological leverage they desperately crave. The global elite understand that defending a weakness is the absolute fastest way to confirm its existence. To maintain your sovereign dominance, you must completely eradicate the reflex to protect your ego, and instead learn to seamlessly absorb and reverse their aggressive energy. To effectively neutralize this insidious tactic, we must first dissect the fragile psychology of the attacker. Individuals who rely on exposing the vulnerabilities of others are rarely operating from a position of authentic strength. Their behavior is fundamentally driven by a profound internal deficit of power and an overwhelming sense of structural inadequacy. Because they cannot dominate the interaction through superior intellect, unmatched resources, or undeniable competence, they are forced to scavenge for your psychological scraps. They throw a verbal spear into your perceived weak point, entirely dependent on your reaction to generate their own momentum. If you react with anger, embarrassment, or a frantic need to explain the context, you act as the engine for their hostile takeover. You are actively subsidizing their illusion of control. The sovereign leader recognizes that these attacks are not reflections of reality but desperate confessions of the attacker's own strategic poverty. By understanding the pathetic mechanics driving their behavior, you instantly detach from the emotional impact of their words, and begin to observe them with the cold, sterile curiosity of an apex predator watching a struggling prey. The most catastrophic error made by aspiring leaders when confronted with a targeted psychological attack is the deployment of rational justification. When someone weapons your past mistake, your immediate instinct is to provide context to explain the mitigating circumstances, or to desperately prove how much you have improved since then. This is a fatal tactical miscalculation. The moment you begin to explain yourself, you are subconsciously submitting to their authority. You have placed them in the position of the judge and reduced yourself to the role of a defensive defendant. You have granted them absolute jurisdiction over the narrative. In the brutal mathematics of power dynamics, whoever is doing the most explaining is losing the negotiation. Justification is the language of the subordinate. The elite completely refuse to participate in this unbalanced dynamic. They understand that their history, their choices, and their perceived flaws require absolutely zero validation from lesser minds. You must ruthlessly sever the biological urge to be understood by those who are actively trying to destroy you. The ultimate high-end conversational strategy for collapsing an attacker's mental framework is known as radical ownership and aggressive amplification. Instead of denying the flaw, you step directly into it with terrifying absolute certainty. When they attempt to corner you with a past failure, you do not retreat, you agree completely and magnify the premise. If they accuse you of being ruthless, you confirm that you are exactly as ruthless as the situation demands, and perhaps even more so. If they point out a financial miscalculation, you acknowledge it as a necessary tax on aggressive global expansion. By radically owning the exact thing they are trying to use against you, you instantly vaporize their leverage. A weapon only works if the target is afraid of it. When you enthusiastically embrace the accusation, you strip the words of their emotional payload. This creates a profound psychological vacuum. The attacker was bracing for resistance, preparing to counter your defensive arguments, but instead they hit a wall of absolute unbothered agreement. This complete lack of friction violently destabilizes their entire cognitive architecture. As you deploy this radical ownership, you will witness a fascinating and devastating phenomenon in real time: the total psychological collapse of your adversary. Because their entire strategy was predicated on your anticipated fear and resistance. Your unshakable agreement leaves them stranded in a state of severe cognitive dissonance. They have played their best card, and it had absolutely zero effect on your sovereign reality. The power dynamic violently reverses in an instant. The silence that follows your absolute agreement becomes a crushing weight on their fragile ego. They will begin to stutter, backtrack, and desperately attempt to recalibrate their position. Because they realize they have just exposed their own malicious intent without inflicting any damage. You have effectively turned their aggressive momentum against them, forcing them to swallow their own toxic energy. We are about to explore the precise linguistic formulas and the exact conversational frameworks required to execute this elite psychological reversal. Are you entirely prepared to transform your perceived weaknesses into impenetrable armor and shatter the minds of those who dare to challenge your absolute sovereignty? Welcome to the advanced phase of our elite psychological restructuring protocol, where we move beyond simple defense into the realm of absolute conversational dominance. You do not require a complex vocabulary or aggressive shouting to fundamentally dismantle an attacker. We begin with the foundational principle of the psychological vacuum, which involves the deliberate and strategic use of absolute stillness. When an adversary attempts to weaponize your past or a perceived weakness, they are looking for a specific emotional resonance to confirm their leverage. You must forcefully shift this dynamic by offering them a void instead of a reaction. This specific cognitive exposure directly starves their manipulative intent and actively rebuilds an impenetrable psychological callus within your own neural pathways. Imagine an opponent trying to provoke you with a calculated insult, and instead of retreating, you simply look at them with a state of chilling, sterile curiosity. You are not ignoring them, you are observing them as a biological specimen. This profound detachment is far more terrifying to a manipulator than any angry retort, because it signals that their best weapons have absolutely zero impact on your sovereign reality. You will rapidly realize that the word weakness is merely a label that only has power if you accept the definition. By refusing to engage in the defensive frame, you effectively delete the weapon from the conversation. You must train yourself to respond to any targeted attack with a calm and measured acknowledgement that completely bypasses the emotional trap. This is the first step in forging an invulnerable executive presence that remains perfectly unbothered by the petty games of inferior minds. To successfully complement your vacuum strategy, we must master the precise linguistic framework of the redirection strike. The amateur attempts to prove they are not weak, while the true master architect of profound dominance simply labels the attacker's intent in real time. When someone tries to shake your confidence by bringing up a historical misstep, you must respond with a technique known as aggressive transparency. You do not hide the misstep, you illuminate it, and then you surgically turn the conversation back toward their own strategic desperation. You might calmly state that it is interesting how much energy they are expending on your past, and then ask them directly what specific outcome they are hoping to achieve with that line of questioning. This specific tactical maneuver creates an immense unbearable pressure on your counterpart, who is suddenly forced to justify their own malicious behavior. It powerfully neutralizes their initial aggression and forces them to confront a leader who is perfectly comfortable in their own skin. Combining this terrifying verbal calm with a completely relaxed physical posture ensures your psychological machinery operates flawlessly without triggering any internal panic or projecting the slightest hint of insecurity. You are no longer defending a weakness, you are actively prosecuting their lack of character. This complete reversal of the power dynamic is the hallmark of elite executive communication. It signals to everyone in the room that you are not only aware of your vulnerabilities, but that you have successfully converted them into impenetrable defensive bastions that can be weaponized at will against any hostile force. The next critical pillar of our elite psychological protection protocol involves engineering an uncompromising mastery of emotional grounding and absolute sovereign detachment. Your mind requires a dedicated defense against the relentless primal urge to be liked or understood, which inherently drives subordinate behavior and hands leverage to those who seek to manipulate you. Simply being smart is not enough, you must be psychologically independent from the opinions of others. You must intentionally anchor your identity in the undeniable reality that you are the sole architect of your value, and that no external actor has the jurisdiction to judge your path. When presented with a hostile or manipulative comment, you must deploy your internal sovereign filter and let the words evaporate before they ever touch your emotional core. Any ambient need for validation severely blunts your strategic capacity and makes you a target for those who specialize in psychological scavenging. Protecting this delicate internal detachment is absolutely non-negotiable for maintaining ultimate structural power and forcing your adversaries to realize that their opinions carry absolutely no weight in your executive world. You must cultivate a chilling level of self-sufficiency where the approval of the herd is viewed as a sterile, irrelevant variable. This level of cognitive independence allows you to navigate the most treacherous social environments with the unwavering grace of an apex predator. You are not seeking a truce, you are enforcing a reality, where your psychological perimeter is a sovereign border that cannot be crossed without your explicit and calculated permission. You have successfully navigated ruthless global markets, built magnificent financial empires, and secured a legacy that will outlast your generation. Your psychological resilience and your ability to reverse the pressure on manipulators represent the ultimate enterprise that demands the most sophisticated level of executive management. Refuse to accept the flawed narrative that being vulnerable means being weak or that your past mistakes are permanent anchors on your potential. You possess the unparalleled resources, the sharp intellect, and now the precise cognitive knowledge to completely rewrite your psychological destiny and turn every attack into an opportunity for dominance. Imagine the profound liberating peace of mind knowing your internal foundation is as robust and impenetrable as the financial fortress you have constructed. Picture yourself effortlessly dominating any interaction, remaining completely unbothered by the chaotic noise of those who try to find your cracks, and instead finding theirs with a single calm observation. True executive power is absolute psychological immunity forged in the fires of radical self-ownership and surgical communication. You are no longer a target, you are the ultimate judge of the interaction. Your ability to absorb an attack and reflect it back with 10 times the force is the final proof of your sovereign authority. You are the master of your narrative and the architect of your own psychological invulnerability. Nothing can shake a mind that has found absolute peace in its own complexity and strength. It is time to take definitive action and elevate your mental portfolio to the highest possible standard of global dominance. Start today by implementing our guided cognitive restructuring routines and strictly engineering your strategic silence and aggressive transparency frameworks. Share this essential masterclass with your peers and loved ones who also value their executive vitality and psychological independence above all else. Your absolute mental integrity and impenetrable sovereign exterior constitute your ultimate future. And it is never too late to reinforce it with absolute cognitive certainty. We are dedicated to providing you with the most advanced scientifically validated strategies for a truly golden and crystal clear life. Please subscribe to our exclusive channel to join a global community of distinguished individuals who refuse to compromise on their sovereignty, and who understand that the one who owns their weaknesses owns the room. Maintain your absolute stillness, stand firm in your truth, and stay eternally golden. The journey to absolute psychological invulnerability begins with a single act of radical self-ownership. Do not allow the small minds of others to dictate the boundaries of your empire. You are the sovereign ruler of your consciousness, and today you have reclaimed your throne. Step into the world with the unshakable confidence of a leader who knows that every attack is simply a chance to prove your absolute superiority. The era of being manipulated is over. The era of your absolute dominance has begun.